So today's session is getting started with Adobe Illustrator. And here are our learning objectives for the session. So by the end of this session, you will hopefully understand the basic concepts of vector graphics, be able to create and edit vector graphics confidently in Illustrator, be able to confidently navigate the Illustrator interface and adjust the layout to suit your project, and be able to confidently use basic tools to produce creative work. So before we go any further, I just want to explain what Adobe Illustrator is. Can you hear me? Yes. So Adobe Illustrator is a vector graphics editor. And when we're thinking about computer graphics, there are two types. There's vector graphics, which we use Illustrator for, and there are also raster graphics. And you've probably come across raster graphics before because they're made up of pixels. So things like photographs, videos are all raster graphics because they're made of pixels. Their data is encoded in little squares of color. And we use Photoshop to edit raster graphics, and we use Illustrator to edit vector graphics. So if raster graphics are made up of pixels, of little individual pieces of color, vector graphics are not made up of pixels. They are made up of mathematical shapes, which sounds like a really bizarre concept to kind of grasp without seeing it in action. So I'm just going to see if I can find, I do have somewhere a demonstration which I should have put into here, but I can't remember where it is. No, I cannot find it. How frustrating. But we will pick it up as as we go along. Let me just double check that it's not in the folder. I did have it for this same session that I did before Christmas, but I don't know where I've put those resources, which is really annoying. No. Okay. Fair enough. We'll move on. So when we're thinking about raster graphics, which are pixel-based, like photographs, the data is kind of listed as, if we've got a picture of a sky, it's going to be blue pixel, blue pixel, blue pixel, blue pixel, blue pixel, and just list the information kind of, left to right, top to bottom. But what happens if, rather than thinking of the pixels as individual elements, if you think of kind of a graphic space as a graph, so you have an x-axis which goes along the bottom and a y-axis that go up the side, and you can then give a value to each individual you can kind of grid it like a graph, like a piece of graph paper, which is still gridding it into what look like pixels. But instead of describing the image as individual points, individual blocks within that graph, you can describe content in that graphics file as shapes that exist at a particular location. So you could say at x100, y100, there is a square that has this many, that is this big. Or you could say that at this location there is a circle that is this big and has a red color. So what that means is that because of the way the data is saved within vector graphics files, it means that their graphics are infinitely scalable without losing any kind of detail, which is really, really useful for a variety of different applications. I'm sure you've both come across a really blurry photograph or a really small photograph that when you've resized it, when you've made it bigger, when you've zoomed in, it's become pixelated or blurry. And that's because the pixels are of a set size. But with a vector graphics, you can zoom in, you can make it smaller, you can make it bigger, and the pixelation doesn't occur. Because of the way that the data is stored, the computer can basically redraw that same data at any resolution. So this has lots of really useful applications, which we will go on to as we go through the session. But one of the most well-known applications is when it comes to text and fonts in computers. You know, if you're in Microsoft Word and you zoom all the way in, the letters don't get blurry. They look the same. They've just gotten bigger. And that is one key use of vector graphics. And if I just zoom in on this text here, you can see that I can zoom all the way in to 12,000%, and that line is as sharp as it is when it's this big. So that's why vector graphics are useful. And as we go through the session, you will see that there are drawbacks. You know, you can't use vector graphics, or well, you can, but it becomes very computer intensive to create realistic looking images using vector graphics. It can be done, but it's obviously not as easy as just taking a photograph of something. You know, it requires true artistic ability. But we're not going to be doing anything that complex today. Have you both downloaded Adobe Illustrator so you're able to open it, follow along with the session? I've got a bit of a task. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for confirming. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close this and we're going to reopen so we can see the interface. So, perfect. I'm on a Mac, so things might look slightly different if you're on a Windows PC, but that's fine. Illustrator. It's opening on this monitor over here, of course. Right. So this is the window that you get when you open Illustrator. If you've used Adobe applications before, which you both have, then you will be familiar with the way that this looks. So I'm going to click on this blue button up here that says New File, and we're going to create a new document. I am going to go ahead and select this Web Large preset, just because it fills the screen nicely, and we can always change our canvas size a little bit later on if we need to. That's really easy to do. I'm going to pop in a file name, so we'll just call this Illustrator demo. I can put in a custom size here if I want. I'm just doing 1080p HD resolution just because it's a good size to work with. But you can see you've got all these different units of measurement. So if you were doing something for a poster, if you were going to design a poster or something, you might want to select A4. And if I just show you quickly, go to print A4, you can see that it changes it to millimeters. I'll just go back to the beginning, go to my Web Large. Because this is intended for the web, we're thinking about pixels because it's a piece of digital work rather than print. We can select if we want it portrait or landscape, and that is just really swapping the width and the height around. We can have multiple artboards in our document. So an artboard is basically like a canvas. We're just going to start with one today. Now we move on to bleed, and bleed is a bit of extra space that you can pop around the edge of your document. It's a bit like a margin, but a margin is on the page. A bleed is outside the page. And what a bleed enables you to do is to just make your content a little bit bigger than your actual size. And the reason for that is if you're going to send something to print, it allows for a little bit of wiggle room if there's inconsistencies in the printing process. And also, if you're printing something like a poster or a leaflet, and you see that the ink has gone all the way to the edge of the paper, the way they do that is by printing on a bigger sheet of paper, right to the edge over the size that you want, and then they cut it down to size. Because if the printer head on the printer went over the edge of the paper, it would cause a paper jam. And we also use bleeds in digital projects because sometimes when you export something, depending on the way that you export, the compression methods that you use, you can run into problems where you might get like one tiny little 1 pixel line across the bottom or across one edge. So by using a bleed, we can overcome that because our content is going to be a little bit bigger than the content size, and it's not always necessary. Like if we're preparing something that is going to be exported as a whole document, if we're exporting the whole image, the whole canvas, then you need to do it. But when I do kind of logo iteration or do anything that's kind of like elements for a web page or font design or anything like that, then we're just going to be exporting individual elements on the page rather than the canvas as a whole. So in that instance, using a bleed isn't as important. But for the purposes of this, we'll follow some good practice and we'll pop a 5-pixel bleed in. Color mode, we're going to stick with RGB. RGB stands for red, green, and blue. And we use that for digital projects because a pixel on a monitor, on a computer screen, has a red, green, and blue value. If we were preparing something for print, then we would use CMYK, and that is short for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key, which are the 4 colors of a typical printing process. So you have four ink colors. If you were going to prepare something for print. But we're going to go with RGB today. Raster effects, default, preview, default. And we're going to press create. So this is what we have open to us. We'll just do a quick tour of the interface. So down here, we've got the status bar. This is where we can zoom in, zoom out, rotate things, navigate across our different artboards if we have multiple artboards. This is our toolbar. Got various tools that we can utilize here. We've got our selection tools, pen tools, shapes, text, and a variety of other tools. And we're not going to cover all of them today. We're just going to cover the key ones that you'll need to get started. Up here, we've got our menus, which I'm sure you're familiar with from other applications that you might use. And just like in other Adobe apps, we can go to Windows and we can change our workspace from to suit different projects that we might be working on. So if I was doing a bit of an illustration project, I might want to go for painting, and this prepares my workspace for a painting project. Or if I go to typography, then this changes my panel layout to suit a typography project that's working with fonts and typefaces. But today we're going to go with essentials, and this just has the bare bones panels open. So speaking of panels, we've got our properties panel here. And as we select different things on our artboard, the properties panel will change. We've got our layers panel, and just like in Photoshop, the layers panel is really, really important in Illustrator. And then we've got the libraries panel. We're going to actually close that. We don't need that today. And as we go through, we'll be going to the window menu and opening new panels as and when we need them. And you can see there are a lot of panels in Illustrator that we can use. So let's talk about vector graphics. We need to get some terminology. Can we design something here and upload onto our HTML page? Yes, absolutely. So when it comes to exporting at the end, most modern web browsers will support SVG files, which is a scalable vector graphic format. Or of course you can export as a PNG for web graphics and for rasterized version, and you can absolutely just upload those to a website as and when you however you wish. With SVGs, we normally use those for logos. So if you ever see a logo online, it's probably an SVG. And the reason for that is that it is scalable. So you can use the same file. Yes, maps, absolutely. You can use the same file as your kind of little icon. You can have it a big logo on your home page, and then when you click onto another page on your website, you can have the logo smaller in the corner, but you can use the same file for both of those rather than having to export different PNGs for different resolutions. Does that make sense? So yeah, we'll go through that towards the end of the session. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly go through and cover some basic operations, and then I've got a bit of a task to work throughout the session. And I will say I've been using Illustrator. It's the Adobe application that I've used the longest. I've been using it for about 15 years, and I'm still learning. It's a very powerful piece of software, but it also takes a little bit of time, I think, to get familiar with the way that it works. So if you're struggling, that's absolutely fine. I've probably got thousands of hours of using Illustrator, and sometimes it's still, I find it difficult. So try not to get overwhelmed. This is a beginner's session. So what I'm going to do is I've talked about how Illustrator is, how vector graphics are made up of mathematical shapes. So we're going to go ahead and start drawing some shapes on our artboard. So I'm going to come over here to our rectangle tool. And as with other Adobe applications, we've got that little triangle in the corner, which means if I long press, I've got other shapes that I can play with. Okay, I'm going to start with a rectangle, and I can click and drag to make a shape. If I hold the Shift key, that will constrain it to a perfect square. You can see I know it's a square because I've got that diagonal pink smart guide down the middle. Okay. And then when I release, I've got my square. Alternatively, I can click once and it will open this dialog for me to pop in a specific value. So I can do, let's do 300, 3000, that'll be enormous. 300 by 400 pixels. And there it is. Okay. Now, I'm going to change to this selection tool, which is the black arrow, the selection tool up here. That enables me to select the shape. I can click on it once, and I can then resize it using the bounding box around the edge. Okay, I click on it once, bounding box around the edge. I can also use these little targets near the corner to round the corners like that. Okay. I want a nice rounded rectangle. I have the shape selected. I can come over to my properties panel over here, and this is where I can apply a fill. So I can click fill here. I can access basic swatches. We call these little blobs of color swatches. Or if I want to do a bit of a custom color, I can double click over here and I can use this, select a custom color, and I can actually save it to my swatches for later. If I tick this, then it will only allow me to select colors that are available to web browsers, which is quite a useful little tool. And you can see that I'm getting a variety of different warnings over here. So without the web color selected, I still get a warning that that's not a web color. So I can click that little icon to jump it to the closest color available to web. Okay, and I've got this one as well. A gamut is a what's the best way to describe this? It's kind of a specific. So obviously the human eye can detect millions of unique colors, and a gamut is kind of a selection of colors that are only available for a specific purpose. So the web color gamut is a selection of colors that are only available to web, and this is a more vague kind of selection of colors that are only available to computers and monitors. So if you see those, it's not the end of the world, but you might want to correct it depending on the project that you're working on. Okay. So I'll just select, let's go for something blue. I can press OK. And I can do exactly the same for the stroke. And the stroke is the line around the outside. I can remove it if I click on the stroke and just do this red line. That removes the outline. Okay. I can add my outline in whichever color I want. I can change the width of my outline like this. Let's go for something a bit bold. If I click on the word stroke, I get additional options. So I've also got the weight here, but I can change the alignment of my stroke. So I can make sure that the middle of the stroke is around the edge, yeah, or I can situate the stroke inside the edge, or I can situate the stroke outside the edge. I can also change the type of corners, which you perhaps can't see very clearly here. So I can do a sharp corner, I can do a rounded corner, or I can do this beveled corner. And we'll come back to these caps a little bit later on. Or I can do a dashed line as well. So that is another, I can just scroll up to change the size of the dash. And I can put a value in there for the gaps. And I could do this to create something completely random. Okay, I'm going to turn that off. And the same goes if I want to do a circle. Now you can see it will remember the most recent appearance properties. Yes. So we've applied the blue, we've applied the orange, and then all of the new shapes that I draw will follow that style. We can adjust the opacity as well, so that's how transparent it is. And now I'm going to go into a bit of terminology. So when we're thinking about these shapes on the canvas, shapes in vector graphics are made up of two parts. We've got anchor points, and anchor points are corners. Yeah, you can see that as I use the direct select tool, which is the white arrow, the direct select tool allows us to select individual components of the shapes that we draw. So I can use the direct select tool and I can select individual anchor points. and I can make changes to my shape. Okay. And then the lines between anchor points are called paths. And you can see as I move my direct selection tool across the path, I can see it's highlighted as path with my pink smart guide. I can select that path and I can move the path around. Okay. So when we're talking about vector graphics, we're going to be using the words anchor, we're going to be using the words path a lot. So just to do Command Z. We've also got a few, if I go back to the direct selection tool, I can select, and if I move the cursor just outside of the bounding box, the bounding box is the kind of transformation box you get around the edge. If I move my cursor just outside, I can rotate, and if I hold Shift, it will constrain it to 45 degrees. Oh, that's new. I did not know that that existed, so I'm going to pretend like that didn't happen. It's a new feature from Illustrator there. And the key kind of concept of working with shapes is that we're combining shapes together in a variety of different ways. So how do we do that? Well, I can just drag my shape over here. And you can see that as I kind of move it around, I get these smart guides telling me where things are aligned. And you can see there that I've got the center of my circle over the edge of my square. Yeah, because I've got the pink smart guide says intersect. Okay, so I know that there's an anchor point of one shape intersecting with a path of another. Okay, I can release, and I can now combine these two shapes together. And like with many operations in Adobe Illustrator, there are multiple ways of doing it. So when I was taught how to use Illustrator, we would use the Pathfinder. So we go to Window, and we click Pathfinder here, and this opens a new panel called the Pathfinder. I'm going to click and drag the top bar there, and I'm just going to snap it down here. I know it's going to snap because it's going to go blue. That's what I like my Pathfinder to be. It's been there for 15 years, and I get very agitated when it's not there. And this allows us to combine shapes. This allows us to combine shapes in a variety of different ways. So what I need to do is I need to make a selection of all of the shapes that I want to be combined. So I can just click and drag using the selection tool. I keep getting muted. I think this is an issue with Teams. This has happened to me a few times. So I can select all of my shapes here. And I come down to the Pathfinder and I can press Unite. And that will join my shapes into one, like that. Okay. I've also got this one, minus front, and this will subtract the shape on top from the shape behind, like that. If I just swap these around, so I need to rearrange these. So I want my square now to be in front of my circle. I can just select my square, come over here to my properties panel, do arrange, and do bring to front. And I can do the same operation again and do minus front. And then we're just left with that part of the circle, that semicircle. And I've also got the intersect tool, which will leave the part of the shape that is overlapped. And then we've got the exclude, which does the opposite. So it removes the overlap and leaves the parts that haven't overlapped. And you can see there are a variety of different tools, and sometimes they work on your selection, sometimes they don't. I just generally kind of click through them until I find the solution that I need, because I can never remember the differences between all of them. So the other way of building shapes is using the Shape Builder tool, and this is quite a new tool in Illustrator. And again, we need to select all of the parts of our shape, and I can come over here to the Shape Builder. Okay, and I can then select, you can see they're kind of getting this gridded pattern put over them. These are the different parts of our shape. And I can just click and drag to combine them all into one. Okay, and then the final thing I'm going to show you for this section is the different transform abilities that we have. And I'm just looking at my just looking over here, I can't see them listed there. If I go to Object, Transform, we know what moving is. That allows us to move things. We know what rotate is. That allows us to rotate. We know what reflect is. If I click reflect, I can flip it. Okay. I can also reflect it against an angle, which is kind of similar to rotate. Object transform scale is just resizing it, but shear is quite a useful one. So this enables you to kind of skew the shape in a variety of different ways. You do have to use it a little bit, can be quite fiddly to use, but well worth knowing that you have got it available to you. And you want to make sure that this preview box is ticked, so you can actually see what you're doing. So what I'd like you to do just for the next kind of 3 or 4 minutes is just familiarize yourself, try drawing some shapes, have a go with these other ones. So the polygon tool, you can see that when I draw a polygon, there are some additional options that you have available, like this little diamond here, or if I do the star tool, we've got this little arrow here, see what they do. If I just give you kind of, let's say 4 or 5 minutes just to familiarize yourself, and then we'll move on to a specific task. Is that all right? I'll take that. Oh yeah, you've said yes, perfect. So yeah, 4 or 5 minutes. Okay, so I shared a link in the chat. If you open that file and download it, it's an Illustrator file. It's .ai file, which is Adobe Illustrator, and then we'll move on to the next part. And I have just found what I was looking for earlier. I don't know why, but it was in a completely different place to where I was expecting it to be. So I'm just going to move them over, just so you can see what I was on about. So I've got 2 images, both created by AI. But one was using a vector graphic AI generator, and one was created using a raster graphic editor. So I've opened my vector graphic version in Illustrator here, and I've got my raster graphic version in Photoshop here. And you can see straight away, let me just turn off that grid. Rulers, guides. Snap to show grid. There we are. So you can see straight away that one, I mean, I know it's a cat riding a dragon, which isn't very realistic, but you can see that one is kind of a more realistic style than the other. This Illustrator version is very cartoonish, and this version is a more kind of a realistic approach to design and art. Now I'll just zoom in quickly so you can see. You can see as soon as I start zooming, it starts to become pixelated all the way down to me being able to see the individual pixels. And those pixels are a fixed size. If I resize this, make it bigger, those pixels are going to get bigger with the image. Whereas with this one, yes, it is more cartoonish. If I just move on to the selection tool, you can see all of the different shapes being highlighted in the blue there. And you can see there are a lot of them. And, they're not like, they're not shapes as in like circles and squares and triangles, but they are individual components. And if I just zoom in, correct keyboard button, you can see that no matter how far in I zoom, I'm at 64,000% zoom and the lines are still sharp. Okay, just to give you an idea of, it's in the wrong button, just to give you an idea, like if you look at the water down here, all of these different shapes, and we'll look at how you create kind of these custom shapes a little bit later. So what I've sent to you, have you both downloaded that document and opened it up? Yep, perfect. So what I've got here is a variety of logos. And what I'd like you to do, and this is a key skill when it comes to using Illustrator, is the idea of tracing. Okay, so what I would like you to do is using the shape tools, and you might need to use a few additional tools. I'm thinking particularly for the BBC. You might not. You might need to use the text tool here, but the same principles apply to the ones that we've explored, is just slowly work through recreating these logos. If I go to the layers panel up here, you can see that the logos are on the bottom layer and it's locked, so I can't accidentally move them, I can't edit anything. But if I go to my trace layer, which is the red one, the one on top, then I can start with my shapes. Yeah, you can see I'm getting some smart guides, which you might find very useful. And what I'll do is I'll give you maybe I'll give you a 5-minute head start, okay, to start working your way through. And obviously this first one, the Microsoft logo, is pretty straightforward. But I'm thinking by the time you get to the Nike swoosh here, you might need a little bit of additional, you might need to be introduced to the next set of tools. So what I suggest we do is you start working your way through. I'll give you a 5-minute head start, and then I'll start doing the same, and you can see how I would go about doing them. And then we'll move on to looking at curves, particularly how we would achieve this swoosh effect. Okay, so you've got until about 3 o'clock to get as far as possible. If you get to the Nike swoosh before then, just drop a message and we will go from there. Okay. Right, okay. I will make a start, and I can show you how you might go about doing this. So let's zoom in on our Microsoft logo here. And what I can do is we'll start with our square tool, and I'll get this roughly aligned. I'm going to hold the Shift key because I know that these are a square. Get that as close as possible. And if I go to my properties, I want to remove the stroke. So I can click on the stroke color here and press this for none, or I can just use these arrow buttons to go all the way down to 0. I'm just going to move it out of the way just very slightly so I can get access to this color. And what I can do is I can actually use this button here called the eyedropper tool. And I can just select that color and it will apply it to the shape that I have selected. Okay, so I can now kind of line that up. And then I can just copy and paste this. Copy, paste. I can do the same process for here. You can see I'm getting those smart guides, really, really helpful. So I know that they're aligned. And then rather than copying and pasting, I've actually got a keyboard shortcut I can use. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the two shapes that I want to copy. So I've selected one, I hold the Shift key and I select the other. I know that they're both selected because the bounding box is around both of them. I'm going to press the Alt button and you can see that my cursor changes when I have the selection tool to kind of a white and black cursor. If I click and drag, it allows me to create a copy. Again, I can get those nice and aligned, a bit like that. And same process goes, I can just use the eyedropper tool to select the color. Just like that. And then what I might want to do is select all of the elements that make up this logo, right click and do group. And then I've got them grouped together as one logo. I'm going to move over to my BBC now, and we can use the same kind of principle. So I can start with a square. I can click and drag. I know it's roughly a square. I thought it was a square, but maybe it isn't. You might find it sometimes helpful to construct it away from what you're doing, so you're not doing an exact trace. I know that this is black. And then I can Alt, actually no, I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to add in my text. So I can go to my text tool. I can click and drag to draw a text box. I'm going to do a capital B. And I can see it's there, it's very small, but the fill color is black. We want it to be white. Now, I somewhere have the actual BBC font, I think, which I'm sure you probably don't have. But if you could have just used Arial or something similar. No. It's called BBC Wreath Sounds. I thought I had it. It must have been for a different project I was working on where I had it. So in that case, we'll just go for something that looks marginally close. Let's just do something like Arial. We'll do Arial Black. We can resize it, make it even bigger. So I can just select the number and just use my mouse scrolling wheel to resize it. There we are. That looks good enough for me. And then I can select both by just clicking and dragging using my my selection tool. Alt and drag. Alt and drag. And again, I'm holding the Shift key at the same time. You need to be a bit of a piano player with your other hand and with your non-mouse hand to press all of the keys at the same time. But I'm holding Shift so that I can only move it left and right from the original position or at a 45-degree angle. So it's really helpful for helping me to get stuff aligned. And then I can just change that to a capital C. Okay. And then same process as before. We can, actually what we might want to do is if I select these two, and I get this in the properties panel, I can actually align these perfectly to the middle, which really is satisfying the perfectionist in me. Okay, and then I might want to group these together individually, because then what I can do, I can select them all and make sure they're all aligned. And if I do this more options, this little ellipsis, I can actually make sure that they're distributed equally as well. Okay. Now, Mitsubishi. Lots of different ways of doing this one. My method will start with a triangle, I think. So we'll go for the polygon tool. We'll just click and drag to start with to get our shape. Let's fill it in the right color using the eyedropper tool again. And then if I use this little diamond on the side, I can slide down the number of sides that it has. Okay. And let's try and get it. Sometimes you might find that actually it's better to do it as a different color so you can see what you're doing. Let's get that nice and aligned up there. I can use the arrow keys on my keyboard to move it tiny little distances. Okay. A bit like that maybe. I think we're probably close enough there. I'm going to drag this down so it's roughly in the middle. I'm going to drag out. Now, if I hold the Alt key again, when dragging out, I can change it so that it adjusts the size, the scaling on both sides, symmetrical. Yeah. So without the Alt key, with the Alt key. I can get that, let's say about here. Just resize it. You can see it takes a little bit of fiddling around, just a tiny bit smaller. No, so not the Command key, it is the Option key on a Mac. Yeah, sorry, my bad. So I've got my Mac here, which is my laptop, but I'm using a Windows keyboard. And yes, it's an Option key on a Mac, Alt key on Windows. My apologies. So then what I can do is we can Alt and drag our triangle. We can rotate it. Hold the Shift key to constrain. So it's perfectly 180 degrees. Can line it up. If we select both, we can get that nice and aligned in the middle. And we can then unite those two together. And now we've got one shape. So now we need to do a little bit of fiddling around in order to get this rotated nicely. So, I mean, we could do it manually. We could do Alt. You can see we're not going to quite get the angle that we want as easily as we could. So we'll delete that. And what we'll do is we can come to this rotate tool. And the first thing that I need to do is select the point of rotation. So I can just click here. And then I can hold Alt and just drag from one of the corners. And I can see, I'm just trying to look, so that's about 120 degrees. Okay, so I know that it's 120 degrees. How do I get that bang on 120 degrees? So if I just do undo, if I, instead of using the rotation tool in the toolbar, I can come up to rotate here. I can, oh, are you okay? You've dropped out and now you've come back as unverified. You can, I think you can still access the chat. Is everything okay? Did your computer crash and burn? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. So what I'm doing is I can see that my center of rotation is in the middle there. It's that blue. It's perhaps not as, let's make this red so we can see it a bit better. So I'm going to go Object. Actually, if I go to the rotate, we can select our point. So that's that little blue thing that you just saw. And we can go to Object. And then we can go to Transform and Rotate. And it's popped it back into the middle. Oh well, that's not a problem. We'll just pop in 120 there. And we'll press Copy. Like that. Okay. And then I can move this over here. And I can get it nice and aligned. Like that. And then I can even use the Reflect tool to reflect it like that. And I can get that nice and aligned. Same as before, select all, right click and group. And what I can do is to see if I've done a good job, I can actually just turn off the visibility of the layer below by clicking on the eye in the layers menu. Yeah, I can see over here the BBC one's disappearing. Okay, Adidas. Let's have a go with this one. So again, lots of different ways to do this same one. I'd say the easiest way to do it is to use the rectangle tool. And we can just draw a rectangle. We want to rotate it. So that it's roughly in the right place. Of course, we can use the rotate tool here to be a bit more specific. So we can select this point as our rotation point, and then we can drag this, get it nice and aligned to there. Like that. You can see it. Sometimes the mouse moves. It can be a little bit tricky. Okay. Like that. You can resize this so that it fills the whole edge. And then it's just a case of Alt and drag. And Alt and drag again. And then Alt and drag one last time. What we'll do is we'll delete that one. What we'll do is we'll draw a new one. And we can just draw it from here. We've got our smart guides. We might have to do this a few times. And we'll just cover all of that. And we will do this and this. And we'll do, oops. We'll do minus front. Yes, as expected, we have to do this a couple of times, but that's fine. Because you can only minus one shape from another. You can't minus one shape from a group of shapes. Minus front. And again, minus front. Oops, I don't think I selected both shapes there. Minus front. And then I can select all of them, group, properties, and make them black. And there we go. Right. So let's move on to the Nike swoosh here. And this is, so we've got some curves involved, and they're not nice curves. They're not perfect circles. So I could, if I really wanted to, kind of get started with a bit of a, just like I did before. I could do a, oops, that's not the right one. I could do my polygon and do a triangle, and I could pop this here and resize and do this and do this, but this is not a very it's not the most efficient way to do this. And you can see that even though I've done that big triangle, you can see that it's actually overlapping some of the curve here. Okay, so this is when we can use probably the most powerful tool in Adobe Illustrator, and that's the pen tool. And you can see it's this fountain pen icon over here. Now, the pen tool is, I'm just actually going to check something quickly. The pen tool is one of the most fiddly, I guess, tools to work with. It's actually really quite tricky to get used to using it. And like I said, like 15 years of using Illustrator, and I still don't manage to do it as well as I would like. And there are lots of, again, like we've done a lot of keyboard shortcuts to speed up our modifications. There are a lot of keyboard shortcuts involved with this as well. So what I'm going to do is I'll just basically show you quickly. So with the pen tool, you are clicking to add anchor points, which we've talked about are like the corners of our shapes, and it will automatically draw paths between those anchor points. And depending on what you do when you click, those paths will either be straight or curved. So I'll show you what I mean. With the pen tool selected, I click once, I've got an anchor point, and you can see the path emanating from it. I click again, I click again, I click again, and I click again. And when I get back to the first point, you saw we had a little O to return to the origin. And there we have a rectangle, okay? Now, if I click and drag, I'm then able to create a curve. And this is called a Bezier curve. And Bezier was a mathematician who did lots of work with geometry. And he kind of developed a lot of very complicated mathematics to describe Bezier curves. And many years ago, when I first started using Illustrator, the pen tool was actually called the Bezier tool, but now it's called the pen tool. And you can see that as I click and drag, it kind of carries the curve on. And if I just do a single click, it changes to a harsh corner. If I click and drag, we get a nice curve. Okay, and these things that are sticking out of the curves, these are called handles. And basically, the path between, the curve between the two anchor points is dictated by the handles. So it will kind of do a bit of a best fit between the two handles, but you only get handles on curves. So you can see here, this curve, got two handles. If I reduce the size of the handle, it reduces the curve a little bit. Can make the curve bigger, elongate it. And it's a behavior that it will take you time to get used to. Okay, so don't get frustrated if you can't get the hang of it immediately. So let's have a go at tracing around the Nike swoosh here. Okay, so we'll go and select our pen tool. I'm just going to change the color of the fill so we can see what we're doing. Let's go for a bright green like that. Might also go to properties. I can decrease the opacity. Let's go down to something like 50%, then we might be able to see a bit better with what we're doing. So we're going to create a new anchor and path, and I know that because we've got the little asterisk next to the pen tool. And I'm going to start probably the easiest point, which is my the kind of right edge here. And because I've got the image underneath it to the perfect size, I actually get that little snap to. And I click once. And we're going to come all the way down here. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to try and click where it starts to curve. And I can use the red line, the preview, to kind of almost guess where that is. Okay. So if I just keep going, I can see, okay, it's a bit before, it's a bit before, it's a bit before. I think probably is best about that. And we can always come back and change these later. Now the goal with the pen tool, it's a bit like a game. We want to create our curves with as few. We want to create nice smooth curves with as few anchor points as possible. Okay. So I've got one, and as a general rule of thumb, although this is not always the case, you probably want to do like the widest part, that is the outer edges of the curves. So you can see here we've got this kind of curve coming round, and this is the point that's furthest away. And conveniently, it's also the edge of the image. So I can snap on, I can click, and I drag to draw my curve. Okay. If I hold Shift, just like before, it will constrain it to 45 degrees. So you can see it's not quite as aligned as I would have liked it, but we can always come back later and give it a go. I thought I reduced the opacity of this. Let's do something like that. Okay. And you can see because of the handle, it's forcing that curve to go up, which is fine. We can always come back and tweak later. And what I want to do is I want to click on my point here. And before I drag, I want to press the Alt key. And this enables me to make a really sharp corner, because I can now drag one handle in one particular direction. So I want to drag this one handle in the direction that I'm now going to go on my curve, which is this way. And just like when I was lining up this line, this straight section here, I'm using the line, the handle that's emanating from that anchor point to guide me. Okay, like that. And now that's actually lined me up pretty good to go around here. Like, well, actually, maybe we can be a bit cheeky, because we're all about reducing the number of anchor points to as few as possible. If I perhaps go about here, let's see what I can do. There we are. That's nice and snug. And just like before, I want to point the handle in the direction of travel. So again, it's a bit of a game of best fit. That looks pretty good to me. I can release. That's a straight section, so I can go back to my origin. Okay. Now, if I want to come back and edit my anchor points, I need to use the direct select tool, which is the white arrow. Yeah. And I can select an anchor point, and I can then just fiddle around with my anchors, a bit like that. Okay. Actually, we're in for a bit of a winner there. I can just drag that up, and that is a pretty good trace of that logo. All I have to do now is fill it black. Okay. So that's the pen tool. How are you getting on? Do you want to give, shall I give you a few minutes to have a go with that? If I go until past, and then we can come back and we can have a go with the apple. Because there's another tip that I can show you, and we'll do that with the apple. So yeah, I'll give you until just after past, some five minutes or so, and then I'll jump back in. Okay. Okay, fab. So that is the basics of the pen tool, and it's a very traditional use of the pen tool. But now you've also got this, which is the curvature tool, and it's a bit like it's a bit of a shortcut for the pen tool in some respects, and again, it's a one that's a bit fiddly to use, but what you can do to speed up your process is if I come to my Apple logo and using the same principles as before, where I'm just clicking, so like over here, we were trying to minimize the number of anchor points on our curves by clicking on the outermost parts. I can use the same logic here, but I'm going to go about it in a slightly different way. So I've got my pen tool selected, and I'm just going to click and do straight lines, okay, at my corners and the peaks and troughs of my curves. Let me just fill this in a different color so we can see a bit better. Okay. And we'll go here, here, here. There. And again, we don't have to be precise because we can come back and edit later. And then if I just use the curve tool, I should be able to just double click on the point that I want to curve. And you can see that really quickly, without doing all the whole clicking and dragging and moving things around, I'm actually pretty much there. I just need to use my direct selection tool up here to just move this around a little bit. So you can use the curvature tool like that to do a bit of a shortcut. And of course you can use it in other ways. So you can kind of do, it works slightly differently. It's a bit of a shortcut to the traditional pen tool, but well worth experimenting with. Especially if you're tracing something quite complex like the Apple logo. So I'm just very aware that we've got about 25 minutes left, and I want to give you a chance to do that. But what I'm just going to come over here and show you with the Instagram logo is just how to do a gradient. And a gradient is basically when you have two or more colors merging into each other. So I'm just going to try and quickly replicate this gradient here in this square. Just so you can see what to do. So if I come over here to fill, and I can select gradient here, and I can select this freeform gradient. Okay. And then I get the gradient applied to the shape. And then what I can do is if I select each one of these color nodes, I can then pop my color in. So I can either select it, I can use the eyedropper tool and do something a bit like this. Eyedropper tool, do something a bit like this. And I think down here, I want to go for this. And I think we probably don't need that one, so I can just press delete to remove it. I can move these gradients around. I can kind of change the amount that they bleed into each other, like how powerful they are. Maybe we need to add in another bit of color. Maybe this needs to be just made a little bit smaller. Maybe we need to add another point, so I can just click here. We can do that kind of fiery orange that it has. A bit like that. So that's how you create a gradient just very quickly. And you know already how to round the corners, how to draw these kinds of shapes. So what I'll do is I'll give you maybe 10 minutes to get as far as you can with the rest of these shapes. So have a go with the Apple one, have a go with the Twitter and the old Twitter logo here. Again, be mindful of these kind of acute angles, these really pointed shapes here. That'll test your pen tool skills. And then, yeah, we'll come back just after, in about 10 minutes, just after 15:48. And we'll wrap up the session. We'll do some exporting and wrap up. Okie doke. And of course, if you have any questions, please do just shout or pop them in the chat. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to at least work through the majority of these graphics. And I mean, you can keep a hold of this logo kind of template exercise, not a problem. You know, and work through it in your own time, delete the layer, remake the layer, and have another go. But what I just want to cover is how do you get stuff out of Illustrator at the end? Because if I just go up here and press save as, and save on my computer, it's going to save it as an Illustrator file, and that is a proprietary format from Adobe. It isn't much use unless you have access to Illustrator on your device. So what we need to do is we need to get our content out of Illustrator into a format that is appropriate for our destination. And there are a few different ways to do it. So or rather, there's one way to do it, but there are lots of different options you need to consider. So I'm going to go up to File, and I'm going to press Export, and then Export for Screens. And I've got my artboards here, and this will export every artboard that I select with this little ticky box. I can double click underneath to give these files a particular name, which is really helpful. And then I want to click over here to decide where my files are going to go. So I'm just going to pop them on the desktop. And what we'll do is we'll just do all of these for the sake of now. I can do all. I've got the option to include my bleed. So I can't remember how much bleed I have on these logos. I think it's probably 5 pixels again, but I'm going to unclick that because I don't want the bleed to be added on. I just want the area within the artboard. I've selected my location. And then down here, I've got my options. So I can export these as a ping. And a ping is a rasterized format. So it will convert my vector graphics into pixels, which means that if I then go and upload that onto a web page, or if I pass it on to somebody, and the resolution is too small, when they scale it up, it's going to go pixelated or blurry. So, you need to decide whether or not a ping is an appropriate use. We normally use ping for computer graphics more generally. Especially logos, because pings have got the ability to have transparency built in. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. So I'm going to select a ping as my example, but then I can also add other, I'm just going to make this window a bit bigger. I can actually export multiple formats at once. So I'm also going to go for a JPEG. And a JPEG is another graphics format. Again, it's a rasterized format, meaning that it's going to take my lovely, infinitely scalable vector graphics and it's going to change them into pixel-based graphics. It's going to rasterize them. If I go to scale again, I can add another one, keep the scale the same. And you can see I've got an SVG, and this is the kind of standard file format for vector graphics. So if you want to upload a vector graphic to a website, most modern browsers support SVGs, so this is what you're going to want to use. Actually, I'm just wondering, can I do? I can. I'm going to reduce these down just to show you the difference, and we'll keep this as. And then we've also got down here as an EPS, and this is another vector graphic format. It stands for Encapsulated Postscript. And we normally use EPS if we're sending vector graphics to print. So for this instance, I'm actually going to delete that one. So I've got all of these artboards which are going to be exported individually as individual items. There's 9 there, and I'm exporting 3 different file formats, which means on my desktop, I'm going to end up with 9 times 3, 27 individual files. Let's press export. Okay. If I just bring my desktop folder over here, we can have a look at what this looks like. So let's go for Adidas here. So we can see this is our adidas.svg. And by default, my computer is set up to open this in Illustrator, but if I open it in Chrome over here, there's my image. You can see I've still got the original underneath, but I can, just like I could before, I can zoom in on this indefinitely and it not get blurry or lose any of its quality. Okay, so that's what we're using an SVG for. You can actually see it looks blurry there because that's the ping of the original image behind. If you look at these lines, this is the my traced vector on top. So that's why that part is blurry, but this part is nice and sharp. Okay, if I just look at the same but as a JPEG, here we are. I can open it in preview on my Mac. And you can see as soon as I start zooming in, we get pixelation. Yeah. And you can see as well that we've got the white background. Yeah, we've got the canvas in the background because JPEGs do not have the ability to support transparency. Okay. And then lastly, we've got our ping, our PNG. You can see if I open this with preview, there's no artboard in the background, okay? Because when I've saved this as a ping, it hasn't counted the artboard as an object in the same way that the JPEG has. It said there's no data on the blank areas of the artboard, so you've got that transparency there. And this is really useful if you're working on a logo design for the web, or if you're working on graphics to include in a video, for example, because you can't actually use vector graphics in like Premiere Pro, for example, but you can use pings. So that's how you get your stuff out of Adobe Illustrator. So we've got a few minutes left. Do you have any questions? Anything you want me to go through again? Please let me know.
Okay. No, thank you very much. It was very useful today.
I'll just pop in my.
If you can send us the link to the recording of this session to our emails.
You should be able to download it from the chat once this meeting is over. So I'll leave that down to you. And I'm just popping into the chat the workshop evaluation survey, and I'd be very grateful if you could fill that in for me. But yes, so I look forward to seeing you. I've got some workshops next week, so I'll probably see you at some of those, perhaps.
Yeah, I will try to participate in majority of them. You know, I have seen them very useful for me because, for example, for this one, I wasn't familiar with this Illustrator at all. So today I learned a lot of things. So it was great for me, and yeah,
I'm glad. But yes, if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email or just pop in and see me at the library.
sure.
Okie doke. So thanks again for coming, and I shall see you both very soon.
Okay?
Yeah,
thank you very much. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.